power is a dangerous thing when left unchecked. For years, Officer Mark Dawson patrolled the streets of Jackson, Mississippi, confident that his authority was absolute. He had the badge, the uniform, and the power to make decisions without question. But one mistake, one traffic stop, was all it took to bring everything crashing down. When he pulled over James Carter, an older black man driving a Cadillac, Dawson assumed it would be just another routine stop. But Carter was no ordinary man. He was a retired U.S. Army colonel, a man who had spent decades serving his country and knew his rights better than most. Dawson, unwilling to be questioned, escalated the situation. He made the arrest, flexing his authority without thinking twice. But power without accountability never lasts. Within hours, the truth came out. The footage spread, outrage grew, and suddenly, the officer who thought he was untouchable found himself under investigation. His career, his reputation, everything unraveled. This story is a reminder: unchecked power isn't strength, it's a ticking time bomb. Eventually, someone will stand up, and when they do, the system will demand answers. Because in a just society, no badge, no title, and no authority should ever place someone above the law. It was a hot afternoon in Jackson, Mississippi, the kind where the heat shimmered off the asphalt and made everything feel sluggish. Officer Mark Dawson sipped his coffee, half watching the road, half thinking about his weekend plans. That's when he saw it, a black 2014 Cadillac CTS rolling through an intersection. The light had been yellow, but in Dawson's eyes, it looked a little too close to red. His fingers moved automatically, flipping on the patrol lights. The siren let out a sharp whoop, and the Cadillac smoothly pulled to the curb. No hesitation. No sudden movements. If anything, the driver seemed completely unfazed. Dawson adjusted his belt as he stepped out. Just another routine stop. But when he reached the driver's side window, something about the man behind the wheel made him uneasy. James Carter, an older black man in his early 60s, sat with his hands on the wheel. His short-sleeved button-up was neatly pressed, his posture straight, his eyes sharp. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't apologetic. He was calm, too calm for Dawson's liking. "License and registration," Dawson said, keeping his voice firm. Carter wasn't nervous. He wasn't apologizing or fumbling for his paperwork. Instead, he sat calmly, his hands resting on the wheel, his expression unreadable. When Dawson demanded his license and registration, Carter simply asked, "May I ask why I was pulled over?" That one question lit a fuse inside Dawson. He was used to obedience, not pushback. "You ran a red light," he snapped, even though deep down, he wasn't entirely sure. Carter glanced in his rearview mirror before meeting Dawson's eyes again. "It was yellow when I crossed," he said evenly. Dawson clenched his jaw. He didn't have a dash cam to prove otherwise, but that didn't matter. His authority had never been questioned like this before. His grip tightened on his belt. "Step out of the car." Carter hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of a quiet understanding of what was about to happen. "Why?" "Because I said so." A heavy silence hung between them before Carter finally complied. He stepped out with a steady precision that only made Dawson angrier. He didn't like how controlled this man was. He didn't like that Carter wasn't afraid. He ordered him to place his hands on the trunk and conducted a pat-down, but he found nothing. No weapons. No drugs. No reason to escalate. But Dawson couldn't let it go. He needed to reassert control. Without warning, he grabbed his handcuffs. "What are you doing?" Carter asked, his voice still calm but firmer now. "Turn around," Dawson ordered. "For what?" Dawson had no real answer. No law had been broken. No crime had been committed. But his pride, his authority, it all demanded that he take control. So he grabbed Carter's wrist. And in that instant, everything changed. Officer Mark Dawson had spent 10 years believing he was in control. He had the badge, the uniform, and the authority. On the streets of Jackson, Mississippi, his word was final. But the day he placed handcuffs on James Carter, he made a mistake that would cost him everything. It didn't take long for things to spiral. At first, Dawson sat at his desk, barely giving the arrest a second thought. Just another day, another stop, another show of force to remind people who was in charge. But within hours, the station was buzzing. Phones were ringing off the hook. Officers whispered in tight circles. Then, his sergeant called him in. "Dawson, get in my office. Now." Sergeant Bill Whitaker, a man who had seen it all, stood by his desk, face set like stone. In his hand was a phone, the call still active. "You want to explain to me," he growled, "why I've got the Pentagon demanding answers?" Dawson frowned. "The what?" Whitaker slammed a file onto the desk. James Carter. Retired U.S. Army Colonel. 30 years of service. 2 tours overseas. High-level Pentagon clearance. And you threw him in a holding cell like a common criminal. Dawson felt the blood drain from his face. "You didn't even check his ID before you decided to play tough guy," Whitaker continued, his voice dangerously low. "Now we've got federal officials breathing down our necks, demanding to know why one of their own was humiliated on the side of the road." Dawson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "You think this is going away?" Whitaker scoffed. "Internal Affairs is launching a full review. They're digging through every stop you've made in the last year." He jabbed a finger into Dawson's chest. "And you better pray they don't find a pattern." Dawson left the office in a haze, but the worst was yet to come. By the time he made it to the locker room, his phone was buzzing non-stop. The body cam footage had gone viral. News stations were airing it, social media was ripping him apart, and the comments were brutal. Another power-hungry cop who thought he was untouchable. This man served his country, and this is how he's treated? Fire him. Press charges. Make an example out of him. Then came the final nail in the coffin, an email from Internal Affairs, mandatory review of past incidents. Immediate compliance required. A young investigator named Elena Martinez was assigned to the case. She sat across from Dawson in the interview room, flipping through his records. "You've been on the force 10 years, she said, tapping a page. "That's a lot of stops. And yet, over 80% of them involved black men." Dawson's jaw tightened. "I stopped suspicious vehicles." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Right. And out of those stops, only 15% received citations. But guess who overwhelmingly got the warnings?" She slid the file toward him. "White drivers." Dawson said nothing. "This isn't just about one stop, Officer Dawson," Martinez continued. "It's a pattern. And we're putting you on unpaid leave until we figure out just how deep it goes." Dawson's stomach dropped. He had always thought he knew how far he could push the line without crossing it. But now, the system he had relied on for protection was turning against him. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't untouchable after all. Then the final blow, his lawyer called. "They're offering you a deal. Resign quietly, and they won't press charges." Dawson stared at the blank television screen in his apartment that night, the resignation letter sitting in front of him. 10 years of power, of control, of thinking he was untouchable, gone. What happened on that hot afternoon in Jackson, Mississippi, was more than just a bad traffic stop. It was more than an officer overstepping his authority. It was the moment a system that had long protected the powerful finally turned against one of its own. When Officer Mark Dawson placed handcuffs on Colonel James Carter, he thought it was just another routine arrest. What he didn't realize was that Carter wasn't just another man, he was a decorated Army veteran with deep connections in Washington. The moment Carter made his phone call, the wheels of change began turning. Within hours, the video of Dawson's actions was everywhere. News outlets dissected every frame of the footage. Social media exploded with outrage. And unlike so many cases before, this one couldn't be ignored. The public wasn't just angry, they were demanding action. By the next morning, the mayor's office had issued a statement. The police department, once quick to defend its own, was suddenly backpedaling. Then came the real shift: policy changes. Jackson's police force announced a mandatory overhaul of its traffic stop procedures. Racial bias training was now required. Independent oversight committees were being formed. And beyond Jackson, civil rights groups seized the moment, pushing for broader reforms in departments across the country. For years, officers like Dawson had operated with the belief that their actions would never have consequences. That as long as they wore the badge, they could act with impunity. But now, the tide was shifting. The story of Colonel Carter wasn't just a local scandal, it was a national reckoning. At a press conference, Carter stood before reporters, his voice steady, his message clear. "This isn't just about me. It's about a system that allows unchecked power to go unchallenged. If we don't demand accountability now, this will happen again. And again. And again." The crowd erupted in applause. Meanwhile, Officer Dawson sat alone in his apartment, watching it all unfold on his television screen. His badge, once a symbol of authority, now meant nothing. His name was forever tied to a national scandal. He had lost his career, his reputation, and any chance of walking away unscathed. One decision. One abuse of power. And the ripple effects would last for years. Because this time, the system didn't protect him. This time, it held him accountable. And for the first time, officers everywhere were put on notice. The rules had changed. And the badge would no longer shield them from the consequences of their actions. Power without accountability is dangerous. History has shown us that when authority goes unchecked, it leads to abuse, and eventually, to downfall. Officer Mark Dawson believed he was untouchable until one decision cost him everything. His story is a reminder that no one is above the law, not even those who enforce it. For many older Americans, this lesson rings familiar. We have seen powerful figures, politicians, corporate leaders, even law enforcement, fall from grace when their actions finally caught up with them. It may take time, but truth has a way of rising to the surface. And when it does, justice demands an answer. But this isn't just about bad cops or corrupt officials. It's about the importance of questioning authority when something doesn't feel right. It's about standing up, even when it's uncomfortable. People like Colonel James Carter remind us that courage isn't about fighting, it's about refusing to be silenced. As a society, we must demand fairness, transparency, and justice. Because when those in power know they will be held accountable, they are more likely to lead with integrity. And that is the foundation of a nation that truly serves its people.